It is indeed my pleasure to introduce Dr. Po-Shen Loh for this talk. Dr. Loh is a social entrepreneur working across a full spectrum of mathematics and education around the world. He's a math professor here in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon University. He's also a founder of the free personalized learning platform xp.com, which supports a series of online math courses for middle school math curriculum with a focus on creative thinking. He is also well known as the national coach of the USA International Math Olympiad team. In the recent past months this year, he has also focused his efforts in building an app called Novid, the first anonymous contact tracing app released in USA for both Android and iOS for COVID tracing. And he was kind enough to give us a webinar last week about how he got into that and how Novid works. And despite technical glitch that we had, the webinar was widely well received by our NSF community. So I would like to thank him again for that today. Dr. Po also hosts free online YouTube live sessions at PO-SHENLOH.com live every weekday, 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern time. And in that webinar, he interactively answers questions about math. So please check it out whenever you have time within the next week. Without further ado, Dr. Loh, I would like to invite you to give this talk to us.
Okay, well, again, thank you very much. And in case anyone has just arrived, I really do want to thank everybody who's watching this live stream today. Everyone's busy. We have many, many things in our world. And I also understand that it takes something to bring together a family to all pay attention to a live stream. And so what I'm going to try to do today is I'm going to try to give something that hopefully is interesting, no matter what your age is, whether you are in elementary school or whether you are in high school or whether you are a parent like me. I'm actually a parent too. But now, what are we talking about today? Today, the focus is around competitions. And it's a particular honor and pleasure to speak about competitions at an event hosted by North-South Foundation, because I've heard about your competitions for quite a while. And I've also heard about the great successes of your community in these competitions and in the competitions that I happen to see, that I happen to maybe oversee. So congratulations to your community, and thank you for having me as a part of it for an hour or so today. Now, the title of today's talk is the why and how of competitions. I didn't only want to talk about the how of competitions, because in some sense, the first step of the how is the why. And the why is not only useful if the why is understood by, say, parents. The why actually ideally is understood also by all the students. And I'm here in some sense to tell you a bit of my own story. I grew up in the United States. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and my life was fundamentally impacted by the fact that I participated in these competitions early on. Those of you who watched my talk last week, if it was last week or the week before, everything blends together for me. But my recent talk to North-South Foundation group, you can see that somehow these days I work on things which are not only about math competitions. But that's why the why is so powerful. Math competitions are not just something that you do just for the sake of competing. And so in today's talk, we hopefully will talk about some of that. And I'll talk about all of it through my own personal lens of my own experience. Not because I am the only correct experience, but only because that's the only experience I understand well enough to share with you. This is only one example of what maybe some people can do. And there are many, many, many interesting things, interesting examples. I encourage you, if you're interested by this, to go dig in some more. So let's start. So now I wanted to maybe put some pictures up. My style of making a presentation is to have as few English words or any words as possible on the slides, but maybe have some pictures because, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So let me switch over to the other part. 1 second. The way that my system works is that I actually use the background to do this. 1 second. Great. Now we're back. Okay, great. So here's where I maybe will start a little bit of it. This is a particular picture taken in Thailand. And what this is from the International Mathematical Olympiad. Now, International Mathematical Olympiad is a competition where all of the countries in the world send their top 6 students. Actually, in this particular picture here, I'll cover myself up. You don't need to see me. So I'm over here, right? That's me. Don't need to see me. Actually, this is sort of like modern day Photoshop, I guess. But we have 6 students, and these are the 6 students from the United States International Math Olympiad team from here over to here, in the very first year recently that the United States placed #1 in the entire world. Actually, the person who's right next to me right now is a person from the North-South community. I believe he was quite successful in your competitions as well. Shyam, I think he must be a superstar for some of you. But Shyam was actually one of the great people who helped to lead this particular US team to success. And this is just a picture showing, in some sense, what is one of the end points that, well, not actually, I need to correct, it's not the end point at all, but one of these highlight points that many people pay attention to. And this particular picture ended up being all over the internet that particular year because the United States had not won the International Math Olympiad for 20 years. But then afterwards, when the reporters asked me, you know, what's so special? How did this happen? I thought about this some. And I after thinking about it some, I came to the conclusion that somehow the win for United States actually came from a combination of two ideals: freedom to pursue happiness and freedom of information. And what do I mean by this? I think actually this is quite true. And why I'm giving this talk about the why of the math competitions is because there's a freedom to pursue happiness here. Anyone who wants to spend their time becoming an expert at American football, you're free to do so, and more power to you. And anyone who wants to become a champion speller, more power to you too. It's your choice. If you want to go into mathematics, also go for it. It's your choice. And that's actually the system that we happen to have right here in the United States that works so well for at least encouraging this extraordinary talent. Maybe it doesn't work so well in the aggregate sometimes in terms of fairness, but from the point of view of maybe the community who's watching this particular webinar, for the people who are choosing to spend their time to push themselves in these competition directions, you have the freedom to do so. You're not encumbered by enormous amounts of schoolwork. And you also have this freedom of information here, where you are able to use all these resources which are on the internet nowadays to go and learn just about anything. Now, there's something else that was also a very important observation. People asked, where are these people from? These amazing people who win these competitions. Are they all from San Francisco? Because as we know, that happens to be a place that has a lot of talent. And why I want to give this comment to people who are watching this webinar is because sometimes people who are watching the webinar think, there's no way it could be me. There's no way I could be involved in something like this. I just grow up in a city which maybe has not so many people. Well, let me tell you a little thing about the team, this first team that made some history for the United States of being the first win in 20-some years. This is where they were from. As you can see in my little picture here, there is nothing west of Kansas. In fact, the farthest west is Shyam. So this happens to be Kansas. So Shyam was from Kansas. We actually also had somebody from St. Louis, Missouri. Over here on my other side, you can see that, oops, I'm covering it up over here. I'm playing the weatherman, actually. That's how this system works. But over here, we happen to have somebody from South Carolina. And then over in New York, we did have somebody, but then New York happens to be Rochester, New York. And then finally, maybe in the places you might expect more of New York, we have a person who is from just outside New York, the New Jersey area, and another person from just outside New York, the Connecticut area. And why I wanted to show this is I wanted to immediately take apart the idea that you have to live in some enormous metropolitan area with lots and lots of educational coaching resources in order to become great. Not true at all. Actually, what it is that you just need to have enormous amount of commitment. And then you have to want to take advantage of all of the resources that may be around the internet, or all of these other kinds of competitions you can participate in, maybe organized by North-South or organized by other people. So this is a map that shows that things are possible. And I think in some sense, if I can make a comment to the young people who I see as, I relate very much to them because I see in your eyes what I was not that long ago. What I wanted to communicate to every young person is, don't assume that just because of where you are growing up or what your circumstances are, that you are limited. Actually, the only thing that limits you is your ambition. And so in some sense, my goal from this talk is to maybe encourage people to be as ambitious as possible, because you never know what you can achieve. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how I was growing up. You see, I didn't grow up in a big city either. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, which is right here. I think it's right here because that's the intersection of several freeways. It's the capital city of Wisconsin. So when I was growing up in Wisconsin, I was just some guy. And I remember hearing about some interesting news. And actually, my story starts from some interesting news that came around when I was in 6th grade. This is something which was historical at that. I mean, it made history at that time. This is a New York Times article actually, where the American Math Olympiad team won. They placed #1 in the International Math Olympiad. And this thing, I mean, I'm just covering up some text. The text is not super important, but the important thing is that this made national news. And to an impressionable 6th grader at that time, I was just a little bit amazed that there is such a thing as a academic competition. I mean, even something called an Olympiad. I had always thought that Olympics were just for swimming. And so something that was interesting to me and it made a big impression was, there are competitions in academics. I actually like thinking. I like academics. Maybe I can play these kinds of things. But I'll tell you, at that time, I thought, this article is only talking about people who I will never imagine meeting in my life. I will never imagine being anywhere close or working with any people like this in my life because I'm just some random guy growing up in Madison, Wisconsin. That's what I thought. So nevertheless, though, it's not a bad thing to dream. So, I said, probably won't be, but that doesn't stop me from trying. In fact, having something to reach for is always good. In some sense, I think maybe a style I'd like to encourage to all of the young people who are watching this talk. Although I said, you may think it can never be you. Well, I'm basically saying, I thought probably wouldn't be me, but I'm going to try anyway. And because it's supposed to be hard, now I'm interested. Because there's a certain thing about, I guess, the way I take my approach to the world. I'm actually very interested in challenges. So the more impossible or difficult something sounds, in some sense, the more interested I am in giving it a go. And the reason I like that is because, if you fail, it wasn't supposed to be possible anyway, so you won't feel that bad. But on the other hand, if you ever succeed, you feel really good. So I played in these contests. Actually, I'll talk about some of these competitions later in this presentation because I'm sure that people want to have some overview of how these competitions work. But as I was playing in these, I was always motivated by challenging myself. I was also motivated by the really interesting people that I met while I was doing these. And after I played with it for a while, actually, I ended up being also in something which was also a national team. Actually, I also was on an International Math Olympiad team in 1999. So this is what happened the year that I was on the team. Unfortunately, the team wasn't picked so well in the sense that they put me on the team. So we actually did the worst. That's my claim to fame. I'm on one of the worst. I myself was a competitor on one of the worst teams in the United States history. I should say actually this is a fake news. I made this fake news just for the fun of this presentation. There was actually no article in the Onion about our disaster. However, this thing is true. It is true that somehow we didn't do so well, and I'll say I learned some lessons from that. One lesson that I learned is that there are a lot of brilliant people in the world, and whatever I ever think of myself, it's always humbling to go and see what else there is out there. But I'm just telling you, that's where I come from. I come from a type of person who played with these things. I was okay, but at the same time, I think it was an important lesson for me to go and learn how good everyone else is. I thought that actually this would be the end of it, by the way. After this, I said I should probably leave mathematics. I should probably never touch the Olympiads ever again, because the world would be better off having better people involved in these things. But history is a funny thing, and history has a sense of humor, one can say. I actually thought in the year 1999 that I would never have any involvement ever again. But it turns out that the United States of America hosted the entire competition in 2001. And then with the budget surplus in 2002, there was a need to organize a super huge American Math Olympiad training program. Super huge, so huge that this many people attended it. And so what this is a clearly dated picture from the year 2002 of some really interesting people who all came together to go to a math camp. And what they needed is they needed some people to help coach. And that's actually how I ended up getting back into this. I'm showing this picture also just to show how, it's really interesting how these math competitions or programs bring people together. This is a snapshot of about 180 people who came together for a math camp in the year 2002. There were a lot of fundamental friendships formed at this program that actually last to this day. And I myself am still in touch with some of the people that I met here. I was one of the assistant coaches, and I was brought along because of the reason that somehow they needed more coaches. Suddenly, if you have more people in this camp, you need to have more coaches. And so they just asked anyone who had any sort of skill to come along, and they even got to me. And I said, well, if you really do need my help, I guess I'm happy to help. I'm happy to help to try to teach, but you probably should have me teach the beginners. And that's actually where I started doing all of these things. Now, a little bit about why this is important. You might say, well, here, just a picture, right? Just a picture of 180 people. But something that happens when you have a competition, or whether you have, or when you have a camp, and when you bring together so many interesting, ambitious, talented people, and not just talented, there's lots of talent in the world, but what I'm most interested is in talent that matches hard work. Just talent alone is useless. But if you go and put talent and hard work together and get interesting people together, you never know what they start to create. And the community of people who have played in these competitions have gone on to do some pretty interesting things. I want to tell an example. So, and this is also something that's been very inspiring to me, and why I think that these competitions are enormously valuable, far beyond just getting into college. Because getting into college, honestly, in these days, when you see what has happened to college, I would say that the getting into college is the less interesting part. The what you do afterwards is far more interesting. And to be able to have some inspiration from some of the other people who are really engaging themselves at all times is amazing. I'll tell you a story about one person from this competition community who I had the chance to know quite well because we went to college together in the end. And he was not from the math competition community, he was from the programming competition community. But these two communities are very tight because in order to do good computer programming, you also generally need to do good math. So the story of this guy is that we both went to college together and we both liked to play in these computer contests together. He also took a lot of math classes. But there was a time after I graduated, then I went on to do a master's degree. I was out at the University of Cambridge, and I was just doing my academic life, and we were keeping in touch. And he was an interesting guy, and we corresponded. And he at some point he said, we were talking about our next plans, and he commented that he actually had just joined a startup company. Now, a startup company in the year 2004, 2005 was not the same life. It was not the same hotness as right now. It was also not the same hotness as the 1990s. In fact, it was right after the dot-com burst, right? So this was not considered to be the most the best. This was not considered to be the safest type of decision. But he was telling me about how he was working with this startup company, and actually at that time he was the chief technology officer at a time when somehow the startup company had, I think they were working in a house. They were still working in a house, so they didn't have a proper office yet. And so I thought this was really interesting. This was one of my friends who I respected very much, and just seeing the way that he applied himself to do these new challenges and the boldness that he had in order to do them were inspiring to me. And that has actually made a strong impact on my life to this day. And again, I'm trying to say the competition aspect is important. I believe that in some sense that contributed to, well, what he did, what I did, how we met, and all of these things. And I was talking to him about this company that he was working for. At that time, the company was like, it was not clear to people that the company was that going to be that successful. In some sense, it seemed like just a game that you'd play and a bunch of college students were playing around with it. But he gave me the website, and I went to the website to see what this was all about. This is the company I'm talking about. So at the time that he was doing this, it was the Facebook, and it was not yet something that had blown up completely. But somehow history, what is it called? Like hindsight is 2020. Nowadays, when you go and look and you say, oh wow, the Facebook. So Facebook, if you were there when it was the group working inside a house, that would be a pretty interesting place to be. But you see, to me, this is all very interesting because it shows how maybe in some sense, if your whole if your skills have been built through this kind of environment, and also if you're always trying to achieve more, then you challenge yourself, and you might even go and try some things that are risky. And this has been something that has influenced me. Seeing somebody who's so close to myself that went and did these things was amazing. Actually, it was also amazing to see what he did afterwards, because he actually didn't stay on all the way with Facebook. By the way, this person I'm talking about is, I'll say the name in a moment, but he didn't keep working on with Facebook because he wanted more challenges. And so at a certain point, he actually left Facebook, and he went on to do something else, which again, people all thought he was crazy. The thing that he had thought of was, everyone is using the internet these days, meaning in the mid 2000s, using the internet to go and try to find information. And maybe not just the internet, maybe books. And after you find this information, you go and try to, well, you've got all these little bits of information, which are great answers to tough questions, which are known by people, but not shared. And so he had an idea that said, why not just share all of this information and find a way to collect, these questions that people might ask, and then maybe see all the best answers that might come from them. Maybe you can sort the answers to go and see what are the best answers to these questions. And at this time, people thought he was nuts. I mean, people said, who in the world would care about this thing? Who will join this? How will it be any good? How will the quality be any good? He did it anyway. I'm actually talking about a website that some of you may use maybe on a every few days basis, Quora. This person I'm talking about, by the way, is Adam D'Angelo, founder of Quora, first CTO of Facebook. And his background is actually that he played pretty seriously in these competitions back when he was in high school. And we met through that, in some sense, not met, we met through college, but we actually bonded in some sense through the fact that we both did these kinds of things before. And what I'm saying is that somehow, to me, it's always been inspiring that if somebody has had a background which is always challenging themselves, what could you do if you keep challenging? And now I'm going to pull it back into another fun picture, which is, some people ask, suppose you have people who are just doing math all day. Are they sick and tired of it? I'm going to stand over here so I can sort of differentiate myself from the rest of this picture. I'm showing you a picture from inside the math competition training camp in the United States. And what we do nowadays is we actually have some of our classes on the floor in the lounge inside the dormitory. And what this is another one of our great instructors who was giving a lecture on quantum computing. Why I'm saying this is because I'm just pointing out that somehow you might think of competitions as just trying to help people get better and better at these math competitions. But it's not quite true, because actually what ends up happening is that what's most interesting is to bring together people who have a lot of ambition and are displaying hard work and some talent, and then helping to give them all more tools so that hopefully people can do more things. And at the same time, the whole point is that I hope that as you all are participating in competitions, it can be really interesting that you meet other people. And that's actually what I'm always trying to help facilitate. In fact, as some of you know, I'm actually always inspired by what other people have done. And so what I've also chosen to do recently has also been to go and see what you can do from the, from this background in trying to challenge, trying to push to further levels. And so some of you know, now what I'm doing is working on contact tracing to hopefully stop the spread of COVID-19. But why I put this up is because I want to emphasize that some of the core team that I assembled, that I recruited and rallied to join this, actually have their root in competitions. So the last seminar that I gave to North-South Foundation was sharing some of these mathematical insights in trying to fight COVID-19. Today, we're talking about competitions and the why of competitions. And what I want to emphasize is that actually one reason why we were able to move so fast and get so far is because the people that we brought in some of the core technical roles had strong backgrounds in the innovation and the creativity and the challenge of oneself that is only born in the fire, in some sense, the fire and the forge of this competition world. And so if you use Novit, you're actually basically using the contributions of some people who met in all of those pictures I just showed you, who came together to try to do something. And my hope is that if you decide that you want to play in competitions, this is speaking to the young people in the audience, if you decide you want to play in these competitions, don't just try to win. Also try to make sure that you make as many friends as possible. Because the mini lesson I want to say from putting this slide up is you never know. About like 20 years after you do the competition, you might have some idea you want to do. And the best people to put on your team will probably be those other people that you got to meet at these contests. So now let me talk a little bit about what might be involved in doing these competitions. I hope that the why was somewhat compelling. I personally think that my life was fundamentally changed by going into that world. And I think that what's important to all of us then is to try to figure out, okay, how can we all internalize the why so that we'll want to be part of this? And then secondly, how? How do I try to move through these contests in a way that might be able to help me meet some of these other people? Because I want to tell you, I'm a people person. And actually my motivation for doing all these contests was always that I wanted to meet these neat people. I wanted to meet people who could kick my butt. I mean, sorry for the language, but I wanted to meet people who were just so much better than me that I would look at them and say, wow, it's amazing to be able to be close to you and see what you do. And maybe I can even learn something from you. So that's actually something I've always wanted. I always wanted to be able to see up close amazing people. And the best way to do that is to be able to progress through the how of these competitions, because every single level you go to unlocks another world to you of another level of ambition and hard work of, I mean, these kinds of people. Right. So I want to start with middle school. Now, I understand that somehow we don't only have middle school students here. We have middle school, high school, we have some elementary school. We also have parents, we have people maybe in college, who knows. But I'm going to talk about middle school instead of elementary school, because my opinion is that if you're in elementary school, just start thinking about middle school. Just start playing with these middle school contests. In fact, even if you're in first grade, there are some questions that are inside this that you can actually pick out and play with. And I would actually say that these are probably better uses of your time than just doing pages and pages of multiplication problems. So to me, the contest that somehow most people look at is math counts. When I say look at, I don't mean colleges. You'll never go and write on your college application your math counts results. You just shouldn't. I'll say this because I happen to have been able to see some college applications, because what I work with at Carnegie Mellon University is I also, help to advise on. I advise. I don't tell people what to do, but I advise on, what is the meaning of this thing people participated in or that thing people participated in. And the reason it's not advised to write your math counts results on your college application essay is because you only have space to write about 5 major accomplishments. And if one of your 5 major accomplishments was done when you were in 8th grade, the question on everyone's mind is, and that was the high point in your life? Hopefully not. Hopefully you've gone on to do more things since then. So math counts is not here just to, get admission to something. Math counts is here to open the door for you to go and see what is challenge, to go and meet really neat people. The math counts competition lets you meet people because there are many levels. There's something called the chapter level. Chapter effectively is city or region. The state level is what happens when actually there's one first level called the school level. At the school level, some teams are chosen. But that's also a beautiful part, because at the school level, you can have people who are participating even if they're not on the team for the school. And that's good, because we actually want as many people as possible to get involved in these things. And in the school that I went to in Madison, Wisconsin, we had more people participating in the school practices than actually eventually went to represent the school. And that's fine. And actually, if I look back to see what those people are doing now, it's really interesting. I mean, one of them is a successful venture capitalist. He actually exited a company at some point earlier, I believe. We've got, of course, people who are working in medicine as doctors. We've got a guy who runs, I think, a law firm. We have 2 professors. We have an architect. So we have people who have all done very interesting things. And I actually attribute a lot of what drove me to do these things to be my own experience working on every single week for about 3 hours, working with some really inspiring people from my school. And that's the first scope that it starts in. Then there's the chapter where the school sends a team, and the team competes, and then somehow the top people from the chapter go on to the state. And the experience of going to the state competition is you basically go there thinking, I thought I was pretty smart, but then you go and meet people who came from other chapters, and suddenly these are all the best people from all of the chapters in the state, all of whom thought they're pretty smart. And in fact, you find out that you're okay, but there's like some even better people. Very interesting experience. Then, of course, the top 4 people in the state go on to represent the country. And the same experience happens. These people often are used to thinking, yes, we're the best. And then you go there and you meet other people who are also the best. And it's very interesting. But this math count stops at national. And my attitude towards math counts is every single person should go and play in this thing, because the amount of benefit you get from meeting and hanging out with all of these other people who care about math at this critical middle school age is so valuable. And furthermore, if you're one of the people who organizes practices, I have an advice to you. This is what our math counts coach did. You order pizza. And I mean, you make it into something that's fun. And if you have something that's fun that brings together some 10, 15 amazing people from a middle school on a weekly basis, that will have such a fundamental impact on the rest of their life. There's another contest also. It's run by the Mathematical Association of America. And the Mathematical Association of America is, I believe it's the longest running nonprofit organization in the US which promotes mathematics. I'm actually not entirely sure if it really is longest running, but it's running for a very long time. And they run all of the math competitions that you participate in at the high school level in the US. Sorry, they don't run all of them. They run all of the ones that lead to the International Math Olympiad. However, in the middle school, they also have something called the AMC8. This is fun. I recommend everyone participate. I recommend you participate as soon as you can do some of the questions. The 8 in the AMC8 means that you have to be in 8th grade or below. And since it says 8th grade or below, if you're in 3rd grade, you can participate. And I would advise you to participate because you will find that there are some problems that you can play with. And it's a nice challenge. You don't have to ace it. In fact, very few people ace this exam. Most people don't get perfect scores. But that's the whole point. You basically want to go and try challenging yourself. And as you challenge yourself, you'll be able to challenge yourself more and more and more into the future. So this usually is every fall. Although because of COVID-19, I don't know what next year's schedule is going to be like. Regardless, the reason why I advise everyone to play in AMC8 is because actually the fee is usually quite low. If you compare the fee of taking these things to the fee of taking the SAT, I believe it's a different order of magnitude. In the sense, it's a different number of digits. And so I strongly support this kind of work and go ahead and play with these things. They're good. And all the old questions are online, so you can see them. Now, of course, I mean, I should say one of the reasons why MATHCOUNTS in particular is so successful is because they also do a good job of bringing people together in an exciting environment. I'm going to show you a picture from the national competition at MATHCOUNTS. So, you know, what you see here basically looks like a game show. And in fact, this particular shot is from, gosh, I forgot which year it was. Probably it's 2 years ago at this stage. I cannot remember exactly. But it's wonderful to see mathematics celebrated on the same kind of a stage that you normally see athletic events played on. And this is actually a 1v1 match. This is the final round of two particular really, really talented players at MATHCOUNTS. And so, you know, this is just giving an example of how all of these things I've just talked about are super legit. These are things where you can actually feel quite good about challenging yourself in mathematics and science, and they provide great environments for bringing together these people who want to challenge themselves in a common place so that everyone can inspire each other. How about high school? Let me roll over to there. As I mentioned before, the high school contests are run by the Mathematical Association of America, and that's the organization that manages all of the participation of the United States in the International Math Olympiad. And if you're curious how this works, at this point, you have to take the AMC 10 or 12. And the 10 and the 12 just mean the maximum grade you can be in order to participate. Actually, every year, the number of people who take AMC 10, 12 is in the 100,000 to 200,000 range. It's good. And actually, I also think everyone who's ambitious and wants to challenge themselves should take this. You usually register through your school. If your school does not register for it, I strongly advise you to try to ask them to register for it because it's a great opportunity for all the students. Here, let me say a little bit about the question structure. These are hard. I mean, these questions are such that you're really supposed to have quite some difficulty in finishing all of them. And the reason is because this is not the kind of test, actually none of these contests are the kinds of tests that people expect to get 90%. In fact, if you get 90%, you're probably one of the best people already in your city and or maybe your state. But these are contests where you have, I already forgot, I think it's about 25 questions, and each question, I already forgot, something like 1 hour or 90 minutes. These are not super important details, but I'm basically saying that you have a situation where you have a few minutes for each question, and then that causes you to maybe have to think and create an idea. But the reason why these are interesting contests, all of the ones I've said so far, is because all of the questions require creativity. And you cannot do the problem simply by saying, oh, you know, I just add 2 and 2. No, it's not even like I just multiply 2 5-digit numbers. That's actually algorithmic. You have to think about what you should do. And from here, there's the next level, which is called the AIME. If over here you had about 100,000 people playing, over here now you have less than 10,000 playing. So this starts to reduce down. And the AIME, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to learn more sophisticated high school mathematics, because suddenly you have 15 questions to do in 3 hours. And honestly, if you can do one of the questions right, you're really good. Remember, I'm already saying this is something that normally only about 10,000 people take in the entire US. But I'm actually emphasizing that somehow, even if you aren't playing in these contests, if you start looking at these problems, you can learn a lot, because it's wonderful to try to think about questions that, you know, question number 1 might take you an hour to think through. Because in any question we're trying to solve in the real world, any problem we're trying to solve in the real world, those are not just math problems. And very few of them can just be solved in 5 minutes anyway. In fact, almost none of them can be solved even in 3 hours. But this is a great way of building that stamina to go and solve more. From these insanely hard questions, if you happen to do really well at this, you get a prize. And the prize is you get to take another math test. I know that this might not sound the most compelling, but actually I want to emphasize that somehow the fun is in the challenge, and the prize that comes at the end is that you are able to play on this next challenge, and you might even get to meet some people along the way. But that's this USAMO. So the USAMO happens to be the USA Math Olympiad, and what that is now it's only a 6-question test. 6 questions. How hard can that be, right? And in fact, for the 6 questions, you get 9 hours. The 9 hours are quite long, so you can't put that all in one day. So it's actually a 2-day affair, 4.5 hours each day, with just 3 questions for the 4.5 hours. If you solve any one of those 6 questions, you're basically a super genius. That's how these things are designed, and these are all proofs. All of these are supposed to be logical arguments that explain how or why some fact is true. The reason why this is a very useful step along the way of learning math is because eventually the whole point of math is not just to do a calculation. It's to understand which calculation you should do and then be able to explain it to other people. That's this. And of course, the next step from there, if you happen to do really well, is then you represent the United States at the International Math Olympiad. I will meet you. I would hope that we would be able to work together. That would be kind of fun. And somehow what this is it's same format as the USA Math Olympiad. It's just that you're against the world stage. But actually, by the time you meet me, usually what I end up doing is I end up telling all the people who are training for this International Math Olympiad, I first of all flat out tell them, you guys are far more intelligent than I am. Remember, I was on this super lousy team, right? And the super lousiness was not because of the rest of the team. It was in part because of myself. And so what I seek to do is I seek to, help you with, guide you in the strategic direction. Yes, I will teach you a few things which I happen to know, not because I'm smarter, but just because I might have 20 more years of experience having played around. And the other thing I will do to anyone that, with anyone that I happen to meet at the late courses of this particular chain is I will actually be challenging you. Yes, I hope you can do well on these Math Olympiad questions, but what's much more interesting is what you might do 20 years later. And so what we'll try to do is we'll try to facilitate all of those connections. We want people to meet each other. We want people to form friendships, because you never know what is the real problem you'll need to collaborate on in 20 years. I want to maybe close this discussion about these contests with maybe just a picture of, what does it look like at the high school level? What does it look like to bring so many people together? Oh, before I do that, I actually do have to say one practical thing. The practical thing is some people do say, hey, this thing does help with college, doesn't it? And the answer is yes, it actually helps enormously with college. And that's also where if your school is saying that they don't want to submit, they don't want to register for the AMC exam, AMC 10, AMC 12, you just have to tell them that actually when you apply to MIT and Carnegie Mellon and Caltech, when you apply to any of these universities, on the application itself, next to the application asks you for your SAT scores, your AP exam scores. Interesting. They actually might not ask you for your SAT scores in the coming years, but that's only because of the COVID crisis. But what was always true was, in addition to those standardized scores, they actually ask you for the AMC 10 and AMC 12 scores. And the reason for this is because these are some seriously difficult exams, and these actually demonstrate some real ability to think through hard questions. All right. So now maybe just to show a little bit of a picture of what happens when mathematics takes over a sports stadium. This is a picture from the Armel competition. Actually, this is how I got to meet many people, including other families in my area, in the Pittsburgh area. But what happens is that every single year there are all of these interesting contests that actually are beyond just the AMC exams that I talked about before. And this is what happens when we have our regional competition in Penn State. And we actually take over the ice rink. And what you see here is there are lots of people sitting here, but they're not watching the contest. I mean, what's going on in the middle is just a bunch of people running around delivering problem sheets. I'm actually one of them. I just run around the field. That's all I do. But over here in the stands are all of the people who are doing these math problems. And it's really interesting when you, especially from the vantage point of the middle of the rink, when everyone starts thinking, you just get this impression that there's like 1,000 people all around you thinking. And afterwards, they of course run outside and play frisbee. Right. So I think now I want to talk a little bit. I understand that our timing is such that I should wrap this up. So I'm going to say a little bit about, what can we do furthermore on the how, right? So hopefully you now see the infrastructure, the framework that we're working through. And then, what should you do? Suppose you want to coach, or suppose you want to learn, right? Let me start with the coach side. This is a very interesting opinion piece written. It says math teachers should be more like football coaches. The author of this piece is uniquely qualified to go and make this statement, because his name is John Ershaw, and he is a PhD student in mathematics and former professional football player. So this is a very interesting person who I've actually had the chance to talk math with. I mean, we were talking about graph theory and linear algebra. He actually is, the way I would describe it is, he's a mathematician who just so happened to also be good enough at football to be a pro football player. So this is an interesting combination of two, but he actually made an interesting point in this opinion piece. I encourage you to go and take a look at it if you're curious. And the ultimate point is that somehow when you're trying to coach something, you really are trying to help to challenge, you're helping to stretch, you're also helping to encourage, you're helping to help people who think that they've hit their limit to realize that no, they've got more inside them. Right. And I'm not going to go and make this claim that this is something we should apply to all math teachers. On the other hand, if you happen to be a coach, I would recommend that you approach coaching your math team the same way that the football coach does. Although I guess the way that I approach things is there are different styles of coaching, different styles of football coaching even. And so my particular style is one where I guess I don't want to have people, I don't want to be barking at people, but I do want to be pulling the best out of them. And using that mentality can help you with the coaching part. And also, if you think about the athletic parallels, what you really want to do is you want to make sure that every practice, everything that someone is doing is actually stretching them. And whenever I'm coaching or whenever I'm teaching, I just cannot bring myself to give anyone problems that I think they already know how to do. To me, doing a problem that you already know how to do and just like practicing it is not going to stretch your ability to think or to create. I actually much prefer to be always giving the thing that is one more step forward, another stretch, less rote practice, much more stretching that fundamental ability to create. And with that, maybe I should close with some mention of resources, right? So some people ask, are there other resources that you can use? Well, everyone always asks about a book. The book that I generally recommend is a book that is called Competition Math for Middle School. I have nothing to do with this book. It just so happens to be a book that I think I and my collaborators have bought all these different copies of them because everyone needs a copy. And somehow, if you actually do all the problems in the book through different kids that you have, the book also will wear out. So even in our own household, I think we have 2 copies of the book because our first 2 kids, after they went through the book was kind of used, shall we say. And then so we have a third one. So we have a second copy for the new for our youngest. But that's an excellent book. What it does is it helps to walk through all of these kinds of math topics that you actually don't see necessarily in the same way in your school. Highly recommended. The other thing you can do is you can play with old AMC or AMY problems. And these old AMC and AMY problems are all public on the internet. And if you go and play with them, you will challenge yourself. And all of the solutions are there, and it's all free. So that's pretty good. Another thing is there's a free game. This is called For the Win. If you search Google for it, For the Win math game. This happens to be a game where some people like to get together. There's a chat room. People will get to know each other through the chat room, but they will also be challenging themselves to try to do some hard math problems, as quickly as you can. And I feel that actually has built a wonderful community, generally at the middle school level, which the people who do well at that end up doing quite interesting things later on. And the last one, of course, I have to mention just because I happen to be involved in it. The daily challenge is actually what we do. As was mentioned, we have these free YouTube live streams every single day, 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock Eastern time. People just tune in and ask random math questions in algebra, geometry, and the maybe early high school math competition level. And then I just answer them, and we just try to have a nice discussion. I'm doing this every weekday as long as I have the bandwidth to do so. And so far, it seems like I'm still doing it in the summer for the time being. And of course, the daily challenge is also fun. I mean, those YouTube things are funded by the fact that we also have an online course. But I mean, that's just something which is called the daily challenge. If you're curious, you can take a look later. So this is basically what I wanted to share about all of these different angles of competitions. Ultimately, what am I interested in? I'm interested in hopefully bringing more young people into this world of challenging yourself, and challenging yourself in a way where you can then meet other people who are challenging themselves. You form friendships, and goodness knows what you'll do in 20 years. My metric that I use to evaluate what I have done with anyone that I'm coaching is I actually don't evaluate based on does my team win. Actually, when I became the national coach of the US team, I had a conversation with the Mathematical Association of America, the parent organization. And what I explained to them is I said, the US will probably do worse under my lead because I am actually not going to focus on just trying to win the contest. I am much more interested in trying to lay a foundation so that hopefully 20 years later, I can read about something that one of my students did in the New York Times. And to me, I think that's what we should be moving towards.
Thank you, Dr. Po. It was such a wonderful presentation and very motivating. It's only about 50 years later for me. One of the questions I've seen so far is, what if my school doesn't participate in math counts? And as a middle schooler, if the school doesn't participate, could the students participate individually on an individual basis?
Great. Okay, so first of all, let me first double check one thing. Is my video back on for everyone and my
Yes.
audio?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because I turned it down so that you guys could have the other presenters in. The other thing I'm going to apologize is that unfortunately the way my setup is, I'm actually quite far away from the camera and the computer because this is actually the live streaming studio that I use to broadcast all my lessons. So my vision is not actually good enough to read the questions. So if you don't mind helping to be the moderator to just suggest the questions like the one you just gave, I'm happy to answer just about anything. So you just please choose what you think you're interested in, many people want to ask, and we can have this conversation. Does that work?
Yes.
Yes. So let me start with this one. Great. So let me start with this first one. What to do if your school doesn't participate in math counts? Well, when I first participated in math counts, my coach was a parent because it was that the school did not previously participate in math counts, and the parent had moved into town, moved into the neighborhood from another school which used to participate, and he was hoping that his daughter would be able to still play in math counts. And so he volunteered to be the coach. And what he did as a coach was he helped to encourage all of us to, learn things, but he did not see himself as the teacher who was going to teach everything. This is a story of what is possible. You see, his background is that he was an engineer. He was a mechanical engineer at a company which I believe they made the most of the world's plastic bags. It's actually a pretty big claim to fame. But so this is a company, and he was doing mechanical engineering. But what he did as a coach is he made sure that he had a room for us all to meet in for about 3 hours every Sunday. And he also made sure to order pizza. And he also made sure to build an environment where he would give some interesting problems to think about. People would think about them. And then the students would take turns explaining the questions on the blackboard. And he basically played the role of a facilitator or moderator. And this was extremely successful. The amount of time that he spent himself explaining how to do the question was not necessarily so much compared to what he empowered, because if you actually have 10 really good students in a room, chances are that they have a lot of good ideas collectively. So I'm basically explaining that if your school does not participate, there's a solution. You can actually offer to be a volunteer coach. And what you would do then is you would try to bring together not just 4 students for math counts, but aim to bring 10. And then if you bring something like this together, you can just do it on a weekend. And as people do this math together, first of all, they'll be able to participate in the competition. But second of all, everyone will develop quite a lot of better skills. And so my encouragement is it's completely okay if the school does not participate yet, because you can actually help to make it participate.
So, the next question they are asking is, my kid is in the 3rd grade. She wants to know if Kumon math is a good learning format.
Okay, I try to be very professional about making any sort of statement, whether positive or negative, about other products. I will just say there are different philosophies. My personal philosophy is, and the reason I answer it this way is because if your philosophy is different, then different products are excellent. But my personal philosophy towards learning, even for young people like 3rd grade, is that if you can use your time to teach yourself how to attack questions that you haven't seen before, that is a very powerful skill. And what I mean by this is if you get used to looking at a completely new problem, whether the problem is stop the spread of COVID-19 worldwide. You look at a problem and you say, I have no idea how to do it, but I'm used to it. I'm used to being in that situation. Then you go and start to innovate and you start to be creative. And I feel that if you start to do this at the elementary school level, it's quite effective. Let me give you an example of what I would say is a good elementary school problem, right? I actually think that it's quite interesting to ask an elementary school student who's just practicing arithmetic, you know, sort of like Kumon. I would actually ask them questions like, hey, can you do 7 times 7? Oh, you know what? This is a lot easier with a visual aid. 1 second, let me just switch to my blackboard, okay? And then I'll be able to explain exactly what I'm talking about. One moment, please. Here we go. Right. So this is my blackboard. And if we wanted to talk about, you know, 7 times 8, let me make it not so black, right? If I wanted to do something like 7 times, if I wanted to talk about some things that you could do, I might actually start by saying, hey, what's 7 times 7? That's a question to do. And then I would also ask, what is 6 times 8? Okay. And then I'd also ask, what is, I don't know, 9 times 9? And then I'd ask, what is 10 times 8? Wait, I want the order to be in the same way. So just a second. 8 times 10. So on the surface, this looks sort of like Kumon, right? It looks sort of like a bunch of these math problems that you do, except that they're arranged in a special order. I actually did this with one of my kids a long time ago. And if you ask these questions, you find out that it looks kind of interesting. 7 times 7, 49. 6 times 8, 48. That 4 could be drawn better. 48. And if you do 9 times 9, that's 81. And 8 times 10 is 80. And you start to notice a pattern. And as you notice this kind of pattern, then you can start to ask, hey, is there a reason why, or talk about a reason why? And then you're able to stretch even further. And for example, I mean, why is this? I'm sorry, once I start talking about math, I have to explain it. But if I want to explain why this is true, well, it's actually quite simple. It's not simple, actually, it's quite hard to think of if you're young. But if you imagine what it looks like to draw 7 by 7, 7 by 7 is this. And if you want to imagine what is 8 by 10, you just extend, right? So 8 by 10, oh, no, sorry, 6 by 8, 6 by 8. 6 by 8 would be that you cut off one here. Okay, so now this is only 6, and 8 means that you go over to here. And to draw this picture slightly better, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this. So now this is 8. And once you do this, it's actually interesting, because you can say, oh, what's the difference between 7 times 7 and 6 times 8? Well, what actually happened is that in the 7 times 7, you know, you had all of this. And if you want to change the 7 times 7 into a 6 times 8, you could imagine that you took this much of it, up to 6 of them, and moved it all there. So the 7 times 7 actually it has as much area as the 6 times 8, but plus one more little square. Because, you know, if I wanted to turn the green square into the pink rectangle, I'll just grab this part and move it over here. So I'm just giving some examples. Actually, this is exactly what I would do with that particular age group. If that age group happens to already know the times table, what I would do with this is I would give 2-digit number multiplications, like 49 times 51. And then you'd find out that that just happens to be 2499, which is 50 squared minus 1. And what I'm trying to show is that I think actually my personal philosophy is if you are able to take that age group and then, you know, instead of just doing routine problems, to go and make sure that every single problem has a purpose and that purpose triggers the curiosity, I actually think that's a golden opportunity. But again, I respect that there are different schools of thought. There are some people who believe that, you know, having more practice may be useful, because then someday when you go and learn how to think, at least you are already smooth. I just personally have the experience that I found out that if you work with students, and before they're perfectly fluent meaning that they can just do it like a machine super fast, if before that you already teach them how to think, then I often find out that these people end up really being able to think later. And in some sense, when you compare what happens at the high school level of competitions, the high school competitions are the ones where you really have to think. And then you discover that for whatever reason, people who were very good at the middle school things or elementary school things because of their rote power, the mechanical power, they suddenly hit a wall, because suddenly it's not about mechanical power anymore. You actually have to be able to think. And then what you find out is that the people who started off thinking end up bursting past. So my observation is if you care about this particular direction and you want to be able to create in mathematics and science, then I would actually recommend at an early age, go with thinking. On the other hand, if the mathematics is going to be a tool for your life, which by the way, I respect as well. If mathematics is only supposed to be a tool, well then, building the fluency will definitely get you the exam scores. I hope that that's somewhat of an answer. I try to say there's a room in the world for when some people might actually prefer the Kumon style, and there's also room in the world for people who might prefer something else.
The next question I ask is, can you suggest some resources to teach math in a fun way for the elementary school level, please?
Yes, teaching math in a fun way I think is actually very important. I mean, as I said, that you need to have the why, and the why actually has to come from everybody who's participating, even the student. But teaching in a fun way, suppose you're the teacher, if you're the parent at home, what I often would try to do is I would try to think, why is this interesting? Or can I turn it into a puzzle? And whenever I'm explaining something, it has to be that I have something up my sleeve. So what I'm trying to say is, why do you read a book? The reason you read a book or novel is because you think there's going to be some suspense. There's going to be something you learn. Learn not necessarily like math learn, but like it's a plot twist that you're going to learn. There's going to be something fun about it. And that's exactly why the question I just showed you is one there is something fun. It's one that there is something fun at the end of it. And I think that if every math problem has something fun at the end of it, where you say, I didn't know you could look at the world that way, then it actually becomes a lot more fun. Math doesn't have to be fun only because after you do math, you get some reward. No, it actually can be a lot of fun to just say, it's so neat how that fits together. It's sort of like if you do sports, if you ever do a trick shot or you watch some of these soccer players kick a ball upside down over their head, you say, that guy's amazing, right? And so that's the same thing that we want to build. Regarding resources, so I will say that the book I recommended, the Competition Math for Middle School, that's a way that if you have the time as a parent and you yourself look at that book, you will have the source of these questions that you can then feed to your kids as you're teaching them. Other things that might be able to do things that are fun. I mean, I will say I want to be very careful because there are lots of different products in this space, and I'm not actually here just to go and endorse one product over another. I will just simply say, you should go and check out all of the different ones for yourself and go and see, which ones happen to maybe also take this inspiration as a core part of their value proposition. So I think what I'm saying is that things will not be so much fun if the only purpose for doing them is to raise exam scores, because then maybe the product provider is only looking at that one metric. Does it raise exam scores? But there do exist other products in the world where the goal might actually not just be to raise exam scores, but it might be to fundamentally increase that interest while at the same time boosting capability. So I'm sorry if you were looking for explicit resource lists, but I'm just going to mainly say for professionalism, just go and check all of the resources you have heard of and look for yourself. And actually, when you look for yourself, you'll find out what works the best for you.
What is the best way to get started with the Olympiad competitions? Is there any online coaching for those? And also, how do I motivate myself to continue practicing and competing?
Yes. So as I said, actually, you're lucky. There's a lot of free stuff out there. If you want to, I'm going to tell you the free pathway to being able to start and do these Olympiad type competitions is the fact that all of the old problems are just there on the internet. And they're also there with solutions. In fact, that's how I learned. I never had a coach other than my mother. And my mother was very good. She was able to teach me many things. She stayed at home teaching me all of these things. But ultimately, what she taught me from was these old questions. So if you can just go and find the old questions and play with them, that is a completely free road, not easy, but free road to go all the way up. If you wanted something which is somehow more coaching, again, I would simply say there are lots of different resources out there on the internet. There are some things which are taught, which are like on a Zoom live stream, some things which are like books, some things which have cartoons. All I can say is there are a lot of different resources out there, and the best is to maybe go search, because otherwise I feel a little bit funny just like saying this is the best one or that is the best one. I would much prefer to say, if somebody else was asked this question and they answer and give a list, I think that might be a little bit better. But in my personal position, I would rather not go and endorse, this one versus that one versus that one, other than to just tell you there's a spectrum. And if you want free, there's a way to do it for free. And if you want something which is book, There's one book I'll endorse, which is the one I already said, and that book I have no relationship to, and I make no money from that book. It's just that's a good book. And then apart from that, all of these other ways that you could try to get an online course, I would strongly recommend that you actually survey the whole market before you dive in, because it's a time investment.
If I may add, Dr. Po and Dr. Vijay, that is the exact purpose of the math core team or task force that Dr. Chituri alluded to, that we are starting this year. And I'm going to volunteer myself as well to have a compilation of these resources and to learn from kids and parents who have gone through these competitions in the last few years on how to motivate younger generation. So it's coming, and it will. And we have already some resources on NSF website, but we'll be expanding it more and make it more accessible as well.
So I really like that answer, because then that makes it so that I don't personally have to go and make this list. But because I just know too many of these people. When I work in this space, I actually know the people who run all of these things. And so to me, if I list some and I exclude some, it's not appropriate.
I completely agree with you.
That's my situation. And I will also say, I sincerely respect the work that everyone is doing to bring these resources to the space. There's
Absolutely.
a good thing, which is that a lot of them are really trying to do some good. So thank you very much for organizing that actual list of resources.
Girls are generally underrepresented in these math competitions. What factors do you think contribute to this, as well as what can help girls can get to get into the game?
Yes, so I agree. Unfortunately, girls have been underrepresented, and that has nothing to do with capability. In fact, I happen to know some girls who are extremely good at this. Especially even when I was myself competing in these, there was when I went to the International Math Olympiad as a contestant, I was right after the year that the first girl who represented the United States of America was on the team, and she's genius, right? I mean, it's not like somehow there's nothing about girls are fundamentally worse. I strongly reject that opinion. Now, unfortunately, I think that the way that society is built, unfortunately, there are social pressures, and when there are social pressures, that can get in the way. I think somehow there are social pressures even against guys who want to do mathematics. It's unfortunate. And maybe people who really want to do academics, it's socially not necessarily the most popular thing in school. And so my analysis is one degree of this is unfortunately external social pressures. And what I would encourage all people to do, and I grew up in the American system. I myself experienced all of this. What I would advise you, if you are one of the young people who's listening to this, have confidence in yourself. It's a really good thing to be able to have a feeling that what you're doing is actually the right thing to do, and not in a way where you're offending other people. You don't need to do that, right? But there's a certain level of inner calm and inner confidence that you have actually made some good decisions, and that you have some power in the sense that you have something that you will contribute, and you understand why you chose to make those decisions. I personally, when I went through all of school, undergrad, college, high school, middle school, I didn't always do things that fit in perfectly. But I actually knew why, and I had my own understanding of why. And I'll also say my understanding of why was not always the same as my parents' understanding of why, but I did understand, and to this day I still hold those beliefs very strongly. And by having thought all of these things through, I was comfortable going along a pathway that wasn't necessarily what all of the popular people would do in the school. But at the same time, you cannot go and say, I will just be a person who doesn't get along with anyone. The world is social. So you have to learn how to strike this middle ground where you have your own things you stand for, and at the same time, you're able to politically and interpersonally get along with just about everyone who's at school at the same time. So that's why one of my things is about this the social effects. But I have another angle to this as well. The other angle to this is something that all the boys can contribute to. It is very unfortunate that sometimes you see environments where you might have it just happens to be male dominated, and if it just happens to be male dominated, if somehow the culture that's built is one which is very I will say offensive is the wrong word. I don't want to call it offensive, but it can be a bit toxic. There can sometimes be environments built in a very, if it's hyper competitive and the whole feeling is somehow pushing other people, putting other people down. Whenever that happens to be the environment of a competition world, and if there happens to be a dominant group which just so happens to be male, then sometimes it can make it uncomfortable for people who are not part of that dominant group to enter. So what I always encourage is, if you are somebody who's in a dominant group in any setting, whether it's math competitions, spelling bee, or football, or your job someday in your workplace, don't contribute to making it difficult for newcomers to come in. In fact, I would argue that whatever community you're part of, you will benefit if you can have some newcomers who have some more diverse ideas, because this world is complicated and you actually need all those different ideas. So for example, whenever I happen to be a coach, whenever I'm in charge of a group, one of the things I always watch is what is the toxicity level of the environment. And I want to make sure that every environment that I'm responsible for is actually welcoming to newcomers and welcoming to people who might look different from whatever is dominant in that group. So to me, those are the two factors. And I have not said a single thing about IQ, because I don't believe that there's actually any fundamental brain difference.
The next question I have is, what do you recommend for a high school junior to do or practice during the summer months, not just wait for the next year to start?
Yes, this is a very interesting question, because it's coming at a time right now. If you're a high school junior right now, this is a very strange time to be a high school junior, because the COVID-19 pandemic has thrown the future into question. Okay, so I'm just going to give you some advice that's coming out of my head. It's not necessarily filtered to go and make it, I guess I'll just leave it at that. So here's what I would say. It's not quite clear what the situation is going to be with universities. I think many people who are juniors right now, the thing that's on your mind is you're going to be applying to university next year. And what are you going to write on your application if suddenly all of these junior year summer activities are no longer there as opportunities? Because for most people, the strongest part of their portfolio when they apply to university is the junior year summer, the junior year activity, maybe senior year early 1 or 2 months. But what's going to happen is that it's just going to be all thrown into disarray. Well, the first thing is to know that everyone has the same situation. So that will make you hopefully in a better shape. But I think also what we're seeing is we're seeing some quasi disruption in even what's going on in higher education, because there are people who are even wondering, what am I going to do when I go to college, and what is college going to look like? So I think that we're in a situation now where you shouldn't go and plan your junior summer with just trying to optimize your college admission essay, because it's not clear what that would be trying to do. On the other hand, I would advise you right now in this very strange time to use all of the skills you have to start to think about how can you develop skills that are robust enough to handle a strange and uncertain time, because we don't know how long this is going to last. And we also have now seen that there are many different kinds of skills that you need. Effectively, what has just happened is this has just blown apart the hypothesis that all you need in your life is to take enough AP classes and get scores of 5. Because basically anyone who is running that strategy of I'm going to optimize my transcript and my CV so that it looks like it's got the SAT score, it's got the AP exam score, I took enough classes, that's not necessarily going to be that useful at this point. Because also I hear that some of the universities will not even take the SAT scores anymore. So what you actually should probably do is you should try to think about what does it mean to be a person with your skill base. And I can tell you what I did. Like when I was in school, I actually wasn't optimizing my college admission essays. I actually wasn't thinking about college. And that's because my parents had told me, the university locally is quite good. University of Wisconsin-Madison is reasonable. It's also reasonably priced. So, unless you get some kind of a scholarship to go elsewhere, you may as well just go here and it seems fine. And what they told me is what really matters is where you get your PhD or your higher degree, your master's degree, or your doctor or whatever, your MD, anything else. That's actually what matters. So what I'm trying to say is that my own experience was, oh, I've got spare time. I want to learn how to program computers. So I did. I didn't take a course to do that. I just got a computer, a keyboard, and I started programming. And there were various projects I wanted to do. I wanted to organize a math contest for middle school students when I was a junior. I got this idea, junior year summer. And I just got a team of like 40 people together and we went and made a contest, right? So what I'm trying to share with you is it is not a summer where you can follow the old strategy of saying, I would like to go to this famous summer camp. Those don't really exist anymore. I don't want to just use the summer to go and pre-study to have a higher like baseline knowledge in the class I'm going to take next semester so that my normal transcript looks good. I would say that right now is the best time to try to develop all of those other skills, because I can also share, even though I'm a math professor, how in the world did we get to the point of releasing the first contact tracing app for COVID-19 that actually can sense distance? That's actually what we've done. It's the first in the entire world. And how you do that is it's not just through math. You actually need all of these different skills. So in some sense, what I would recommend you do for this summer is to just think of yourself as a person who's trying to gain more different kinds of skills in a genuine way, where it's not going to be just something you're going to do to write down on a college essay, but it's something that you're going to do to make yourself a more powerful contributor to this crazy world that we live in. So that, who knows, maybe 20 years later, when there's like COVID, I can't add, COVID 40, or like some COVID 39, COVID 40, something ridiculous like that, you happen to be in a position that you can do something. And ironically, if you do that, your college admission essay will also be a lot better. But I would say don't think first about the college admission essay. First think about, what could you do to try to make yourself more useful? And this is taking yourself out of the world of saying, these are the boxes I need to tick in order to go to the next stage. Because the whole game, all the rules of the game have actually just changed.
What do you think about Science Olympiad? Did you ever participate in Science Olympiad?
I love science. I think it's great that you said the word science, because unfortunately these days the only people talk about coding. So somehow science actually is fundamental. And I didn't do, oh wait, let's be careful. There's something called Science Olympiad, which is a middle school competition. And there's also called the actual Science Olympiad, like the International Physics Olympiad, International Chemistry Olympiad. To me, all these things are interesting. When I was in middle school, I think I just didn't have the time to go and join the Science Olympiad because I had dumped so much of my energy into the MATHCOUNTS. But it's not that I didn't do science. Actually, I was reading lots of science books and I thought science was fun. I just didn't join that particular team in my school. In retrospect, I would have loved joining that team. I mean, I think I just didn't think about it at the time. When I went to high school, though, I actually spent not all of my time preparing for math Olympiads. In fact, I also played in all of the, some of the other science things too, like chemistry. And to this day, I'm actually very impacted by the fact that I took science seriously. I think that anyone who wants to have some kind of a practical impact on the world, it is helpful to not only know math, not only know computing, but also to know science, because we live in a scientific world. And sorry, I didn't mean impact the world to say that everyone else doesn't impact the world. I was referring to if you want to do some innovation that ultimately has a real world piece. I'm talking about the invention piece. If you're working in a company, you're also impacting the world by contributing inside the company. But I was referring to if you want to someday be one of the inventors of something that will do some real world impact, then you cannot just be a mathematician. Mathematicians generally don't get patents. Somehow what we do, we just get ideas. And then if you want to use the idea, you need to know something about the real world. And I actually took science very, very seriously. When I was doing these contests, I also participated actually in the National Chemistry Olympiad when I was in high school. And so don't neglect that part. And in fact, I'll even say something about our story now of fighting against COVID-19. The reason why we actually made the first app that can measure the distance while doing contact tracing is because of the scientific background. It's because at the very, very beginning of the project, I and a few members of the team made the fundamental observation that if you base all of your measurements on Bluetooth only, it's actually scientifically impossible to go and do what we need to do. And on the other hand, there's some science you can use, like the physics of sound, which we actually are using in all kinds of crazy ways, that if you understand that piece, you can actually go and take one step further and ultimately, hopefully contribute with an innovation. So answer to the question is, love it. Science is great. It's underappreciated nowadays. Everyone only goes for coding. But I'm from the generation that spent significant effort on science as well.
How many hours of practice one needs on every day for math while practicing for the Olympiad?
So this is a question I would actually fit a different way. I would say, how many hours should you be working on something that is developing yourself? On that one, I would actually say it should be a huge number of hours developing yourself. And developing yourself can come in many ways. It can come in social ways as well, because you actually do need to have very, very effective social interpersonal communication skills, deal-making skills, negotiation skills, debating skills. These are all very important. And so this all takes time. And so unfortunately, time can easily be lost. It's possible to be less efficient and kind of organize the jobs that you do so that some of the things that you're doing are not actually necessarily pushing you forward. Actually, on my live stream the other day, somebody asked me, like, how many AP exams should I take? And my advice was, don't just try to win the award of took most AP exams in the school. I don't think that's worth it, right? I mean, don't just go and give yourself work so that it looks like it's good on the college application. Instead, make sure that what you're doing develops yourself. So now, if you want to ask how many hours you should spend every day developing yourself, I would say, outside of school usually ends around 3 o'clock. I would probably say spend like 5 hours a day developing yourself. Developing yourself can also be trying to be a great athlete, right? But I'm saying that somehow spend the time every day that you know to yourself that you were developing yourself, not just kind of consuming and not just kind of saying, whatever, I'm tired, I'll just do something else. It's actually really fun to develop yourself all day. And now, how do you allocate the 5 hours a day? Well, as I said, you also have a physical body. Maybe you want to do something with it. Maybe you need to make sure you're developing that part. But when it comes down to the math side, I actually think that you need to have this strategy. I mean, in some sense, what I've always done with my life is I don't spend all my time on math. I don't. But I actually have a piece of my brain which is thinking, what is my strategy? How am I planning to allocate all of this time, little time that I have, towards all of the different goals that I have? And then you have to be honest to yourself. When you have that strategic piece, then you're analyzing and you're saying, right now I should spend more time on this math piece. Right now I should spend more time on this physics piece. Oh, right now I should do this so I get my school grades right. So I do this piece. But there's no one recipe for everyone, because everyone has slightly different style, slightly different thing they might want, they might see themselves, different role they see themselves contributing in this world. But the one important thing is to not lie to yourself. I mean, it's very easy to deceive yourself and to say, I did enough, this counts. You see, why I said lie to yourself is because, unfortunately, it's relatively easy to lie to other people. I mean, you can just say, oh, somebody told me, but when I say lie to other people, it's not like lie to other people. I mean, you can look like you did what you were supposed to do. I made all these things, I look good on paper. But you yourself should have a good sense of whether that was actually something that helps you. And if you're always thinking a little bit about this and you have this very ambitious attitude of, well, I want to make sure I am making progress, the one person that you shouldn't be able to lie to is yourself.
One other question is, what resources do you offer through your website and your YouTube live streams, etc.?
Okay. So, well, since that was a specific question towards me, yes, about those, I will answer that. So the first thing I'll talk about is the free live streams. It's free. Every single day, I have been going on the internet, 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock p.m. on weekdays, and people have been asking all kinds of questions. And these people come from all over the world, from different parts of the US, from Europe, and from India. And they just ask me questions about math, whether they are questions about, this was a fun one. Somebody asked me, can you take an irrational number raised to another irrational number and get a rational number? You guys can think about that. I already answered that twice on the live stream, but I'm just giving an example of the kinds of things that come up. They are not textbook problems. And whenever anyone asks me, can you teach this, where this is a topic that they would find in school, my answer is, well, you can find that one somewhere else. But what we do is we actually just answer all these very interesting and varied questions where I will pick out specifically the ones that look like they are not your normal school thinking. And then we'll go and get 200 people who are all watching this live stream to kind of think together. They'll watch me make all kinds of arithmetic mistakes and they'll correct all of them. And then what we'll do is we'll figure out how to solve some hard problems and we'll find some interesting angles to look at math with. It's free, 4 o'clock Eastern time every weekday. And so this is something I chose to do because I heard that people had schools not closed, but you couldn't go to schools in the middle of March. And because I happen to have a studio right here anyway that can do all of this broadcasting, I said, well, what does it cost me? I will just stand in front of this camera for 1 hour every day, turn the whole thing on, broadcast to YouTube, and answer questions from around the world. We hope that people will join this, and if more people join this, I'll keep running it. So right now we're running it, and I'll run it into the summer as if we see this is a lot of people watching. The target level is people who are studying algebra or geometry. We have some people who are on the less experienced side. We have occasional people on the more experienced side, and they somehow are also entertained. But this is somehow, when I say algebra geometry, I mean like algebra and geometry for the math competitions. Now that's the free live stream. The other thing is the daily challenge. That happens to be an online course which I run. And why I started that is because actually I had an idea that the best way to learn math was by having to actually fight with problems It's somehow the philosophy I was sharing earlier, but I couldn't find anything else on the internet that was doing it that way. And so what we decided to do is to have something that would cover all of the topics that you would need anyway in middle school math competitions, but organize all of them so that through the online courses, there are problems which are coming, and every lesson is a problem, and the problem is designed to be something that you should not know how to do. That's why it's called challenge. But when you get the problem, you're supposed to think about it, even though you don't know how to do it. And a minute later, there will be a hint. And another minute after that, there will be a bigger hint. And these are carefully designed so that if you think about it and think about it and think about it with the hints, there's a chance that you'll actually crack the problem, because you'll have discovered for yourself how to do these questions before the teacher showed you. And I wanted to let every single person in the world be able to learn math through a way where they actually do that discovery element before the teacher pops it by saying, see, this is what you do. Now can you practice 10 of them? And so actually after that, there is a discussion. I will go, the video segment where I go and explain, and by the way, this question was chosen because you have this way to do it, that way to do it. You connect a bunch of different math topics together. Fundamentally, the purpose of that online course, that's a paid course, that's not free. The paid course is designed in a way so that you would cover all the topics that you'd anyway need to cover in this middle school competition math, but taught in a way where every student gets to fight with it for themselves and then claim it for their own. And the reason why that one is not free is actually that's how I do all of the social impact that I do. So I'm a social entrepreneur, and so for the longest time, everything I did was free, and we were run by donations that people put in. But then at some point, I realized that it would not be sustainable to always run on donations, and so since for whatever reason people wanted that course, we made it, and then we use what we earned from that to go and do all these, to support all these things, like the free YouTube live stream, used to be my travels all around the world giving talks, and actually Novid, the app to stop COVID-19, version 1 was entirely supported by us just saying, well, we are fortunate enough that people wanted these math classes, and we actually just donated what we had, and we made the first version of Novid, which is now what's out there for people to use. So that's my background on these pieces.
What is Programming Olympiad? Can you give a webinar on that?
Oh, wow. Programming Olympiad. I love that stuff. So I think, you want a webinar on Programming Olympiad? This is interesting. I might be able to do that for you. I'm trying to think of the most interesting way that I could do that, because in some sense, Programming Olympiad, how you get into it at different ways. In some sense, the first thing to get into is just, what is programming? Why do I want to program? Maybe we can think about whether or not I can ideate something like that for you that would work for a wide range of audiences. But maybe I'll say a little bit about my experience with it. That's one of the ways I got into programming. I got into programming on 2 angles. One angle was I saw video games and I wanted to write one. That was actually my motivation. I saw video games and I said, I wonder if I can try to make something that looks sort of like that video game. It's a system. It's like, can I construct an entire system that looks just like this and works? That was a challenge to myself. That's like software engineering. But then there was the other piece, which is, can you also come up with algorithms, things that are efficient, that can compute lots of data? That's the Programming Olympiad. The purpose of the Programming Olympiad is it's basically like math. You have some problems that are computationally very difficult. You might have a billion pieces of information that you need to process in 10 seconds. And then you need to write a computer program that intelligently does the correct multiplications, additions, and comparisons so that it doesn't do more work than it's supposed to. And it's basically like a math puzzle where you're saying, I have these things that I could do to calculate. How do I make the calculation steps simple enough, light enough, that I don't actually have to do as many of them? And if I want to fast forward to why that's important, actually with the app we're making, this Novid, this thing to stop the spread of COVID-19, our work that we're doing on that is more computationally intensive than most of the other approaches that the world has been trying to propose, because we have dared to go and build the algorithms that can process a billion pieces of data efficiently. Actually, right now, one of the people who's working closely with me on this particular, on all of our algorithms, because we expect to be able to handle n equals 1 billion people using the whole thing, actually his background is he also did the computer programming contest. He was one of the top 12 also in his year in programming these things. And actually the other website that I built, xp.com, not that I built a team to build, one of the core people, the core person who helped to build it at the beginning, his background also like mine was from these programming competitions. And so we actually built infrastructure and algorithms that could scale out to huge numbers of users without having trouble. So the main way to think about this is the computer programming Olympiads. They will not teach you how to write a video game, but they will teach you how one day, if you have to crunch numbers that correspond to 1 billion people's worth of data, you will not give up. You will not say it's impossible. Instead, you will find some really clever ways to do partial computations that build on other partial computations so that the whole thing can be done. Actually, something I shared on my live stream yesterday. I also have a live stream every weekend on Saturday from 8 o'clock to about 8:45 p.m. That one's not about doing math problems, that's more general. But somebody asked me on that live stream, is there any real life use of the number I, the imaginary number? And the explanation I gave them was how we were able to accelerate the processing on iPhones of our Novid ultrasound processing algorithm by about 100 times by using some tricks that actually came from this world, if you think about optimizing for algorithmic programming contests. So that has a real world impact, because actually today anyone who downloads our app is able to benefit from the fact that there's a 100x speed up in a certain bit of the audio processing code. So yes, I could potentially give you something there. I would just have to think about what different age groups we're seeing and how to do something in a way that could be of some value to as many of them as possible.
I'll take you up on that, and then we can talk about it sometime during fall or
yes.
Then we will do that. And then I will ask you one last question before we close.
Sounds good.
I'm a mom of a kindergartner who is already doing a 3rd or 4th grade math. She loves math. How can I help? Can you please elaborate some competitions and resources she can use?
Okay, well, first of all, congratulations on that. When I say congratulations on that, I'm referring to congratulations on building a love for math. If you have a love for math, you'll be able to do lots and lots of things. Now, if you're already doing problems that are at the 3rd grade level, there are some competitions. I hear there's something called Math Kangaroo. There are also some math Olympiads for elementary and middle school students. These are all things that will have interesting problems. But what you can actually do is you could already grab that book, this competition math for middle school. And if you're doing math at a 3rd grade level, that book will be very hard. But you as a parent can actually, sorry, I mean, if your kid is doing math at the 3rd grade level, it'll be hard. But you as a parent can look at that book and you'll probably be able to cherry pick some very interesting topics and interesting problems that that will be understandable. So I would actually go and say, I'd go so far as to say, you can even already start peeking a little bit at these MATHCOUNTS problems, these AMC 8 problems, these Math Kangaroo problems. For sure you should be able to touch. The MOEMS, Math Olympiads for elementary and middle school students, you can also definitely for sure touch. But you might be able to start introducing this taste of these really more challenging problems. And maybe I'll close with just this one example, which is something that I saw my daughter doing at a point where she was relatively young, learning math. She was, doing some simpler stuff back then. And it was not, I don't think it was a problem that we gave her. I think it's a problem she found somewhere in school or something like that. But the problem was very simple to state. It was just how many squares are there on a chessboard? Not just the squares of the 1 by 1, 1 by 1, not just 64, but how many squares of any size? And of course, there's also one square, which is just the whole thing, right? So there's at least 65 squares. But if you go and count this, you go and find some patterns. And something that struck me as very interesting is she spent a long time doing this problem, maybe like half an hour. And that, to me, builds stamina. That's actually extremely valuable. That alone is worth it, building that stamina at a young age. But also, what was interesting was that she was noticing a pattern, because she counted or calculated or whatnot, and she got that there's, one big square, and then of the squares slightly smaller than the big square, there's 4 of them, then there's 9 of the next one, then there's 16 of the next one, then there's 25 of the next size, then there's 34 of the next size, then there's 49 of the next size, and then there's 64 of the next size. But then she looked at the list and said, wait a second, 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 34, 49, 64. Something's a bit fishy. Why is there 34? And then she went back and recounted it and found out it was 36. So I'm basically showing that somehow this is not like some crazy middle school math. This is just playing with a hard question, noticing patterns, thinking, right? Thinking about something you don't know how to do. And I'll say I was actually just really happy to see that she was willing to think for half an hour on a problem, able to notice a pattern, able to notice where she made a mistake because it broke the pattern. And then ultimately, I don't even remember if she added right at the end. That to me is completely irrelevant. the interesting thing was that you managed to crack how to do this kind of question. So I would actually recommend that question. You know, if you haven't done that question yet, that one's kind of fun. But ultimately, you can find a lot of very interesting competition-style questions that are suitable for young ages. And what I just told you of this question, it doesn't even require 2-digit multiplication. You know, it's not that you have to first get, actually, there's no division. You don't even have to first get all of those basic things down to be mechanically fast before you start to think.